This year, Kendal Briles gave us one of the bigger surprises of the offseason when he left his job as the offensive coordinator at Arkansas to take the same position at TCU. As recently as January 5th, he'd said that he was excited to hashtag run it back with Razorback quarterback KJ Jefferson, and so when he accepted the Horned Frogs offer just 2 weeks later, it left a lot of people wondering what exactly had happened between him and Razorback head coach Sam Pittman. This channel doesn't normally get into that kind of speculation, but in this case, I think that the way that we understand Briles' exit impacts the way that we understand his Arkansas offense and what he might want to do in the future. In this video, then, we'll try to place Arkansas's 2022 offense within the broader context of Briles' play-calling history as we try to figure out what exactly a Kendal Briles offense is and what it might look like under Sonny Dykes at TCU. So to start, who is Kendal Briles and where did his offensive philosophy come from? When we're talking about his early career, the answer is really straightforward. For the better part of 2 decades, he operated almost exclusively within the offense created by his father, Art Briles. This system, often called the Veer and Shoot on the football internet, achieved its highest form at Baylor, where it ranked among the top 3 offenses in the country for an impressive 5 years in a row from 2011 to 2015, with 3 of those being #1 finishes. Kendal's work in that system goes back farther than that, though, to the late 90s, when he played quarterback for his dad at Stephenville High in Texas. As a junior, he threw for 28 touchdowns and more than 3,000 yards in the Veer and Shoot, winning a Texas 4A state championship and Offensive Player of the Year honors along the way. After that season, Art got hired by Mike Leach, who was then the new head coach at Texas Tech and who wanted a high school coach on his staff to help him with the Texas recruiting scene. This meant that Kendal moved with his dad to Lubbock for his senior year, where he played for Wolford Friendship High and threw for more than 3,500 yards and 35 touchdowns while repeating as Offensive Player of the Year. That prep career earned him a spot with Mack Brown's Texas Longhorns, but the quarterback depth chart featured guys like Chris Sims and Major Applewhite, ensuring that Briles had redshirt for his first year and then spent most of his redshirt freshman season on defense, playing as a backup free safety and special teams player. That had changed in 2003, though, when his dad got the head coaching job at Houston. Kendal transferred to follow him there, switched over to wide receiver, and over his last 2 years of eligibility, caught 70 passes for 680 yards and a touchdown. After graduating, Kendal spent the next few years in the private sector before joining the collegiate coaching ranks, where he made his way back to football in 2008 as the wide receivers coach for his father, who'd just gotten the head coaching job at Baylor. Kendal would go on to coach the Bears receivers from 2008 to 2014, picking up the titles of recruiting coordinator and passing game coordinator at various points along the way. Finally, in 2015, he got his first shot as play caller. Up to that point, Baylor's offensive coordinator had been Philip Montgomery, a coach who went all the way back to Briles' Stephenville High days in the 90s, where he'd actually been Kendal's quarterback coach. After the 2014 season, though, Montgomery got a head coaching job at Tulsa, and Kendal was promoted to replace him, taking over the reins of what had become one of the best offenses in the country. Under Montgomery, Baylor's offense had first climbed into the top 15 in 2010, and it would stay there throughout Briles' time in Waco. As impressive as the overall stats were, though, one thing that set the Bears apart was their balance. In the 4 years before Kendal took over, they had a top 5 passing offense every year, and their rushing offense finished in the top 15 in every season but one. The offense was so effective and in so many ways that when Mack Brown was asked by a group of high school coaches how to stop it, all that he could say was, nobody stops Baylor. This, then, was the offense that Kendal took over in 2015, and under his leadership it kept right on rolling, with the Bears leading the nation in offense in his first season and finishing 6th in the next. So what was the elite offensive system that produced so much success, and how did it work? Anytime that you hear someone talk about that Baylor offense, they're probably going to talk about their incredible tempo, and they're probably going to talk about the crazy wide receiver splits that they often used. Here we're seeing an example of those splits with the ball on the right hash, while the 2 receivers up at the top of the screen are essentially flanking the far numbers, with one just inside and one just outside of them. For comparison, on this play we see a random formation from Alabama's offense this year. Just like on the Baylor play, the ball's on the right hash, and there are 2 receivers to the left, but now the widest guy is just inside of the numbers, and the slot receiver's on the hash, putting him maybe 7 yards closer to the ball than Baylor's slot receiver was. The reason that Baylor liked to go with wide splits like this was that when they did so, it created a kind of no man's land in between those wide receivers and the box, making it nearly impossible for anyone lined up in that area to get involved both in coverage over the 2 receivers and in the box against the run. We can see that if we look at this linebacker, who looks like he's trying to midpoint those 2 threats right now. Against the pass, Oklahoma State's asking him to play as a third defender over the 2 wide receivers, so they're having their cornerback bail out to play as a deep outside third defender down the sideline. They're asking the safety inside of him to wall off the slot receiver from the middle of the field and to carry him on anything vertical. And then the linebacker is going to widen to take away anything short that might be run underneath of those defensive backs. After the snap, though, we'll see that linebacker's pass assignment would make it very, very hard for him to also be involved against the run. When we watch him just before the snap, we see him start to walk out toward the hash. And then when the ball's snapped, he's trying to peek back inside to make a run-pass read. When he sees a pass declare, he's going to convert to a full-on run, turning his back to the ball and booking it in order to get to a sure outside zone assignment. What this does, though, is it clears out that no-man's land area between the wide receivers and the box, and here Baylor's just going to attack that space with a quarterback draw RPO. After the snap, the quarterback's eyes snap out to that defender. When he sees him widen out to get to his coverage responsibility, he's then just going to keep the ball for himself and run right into that space that he's vacating. Once he's there, he's got a ton of room, and nobody even gets close to him until he's 20 yards downfield. When we look at that linebacker's sprint to the sideline, it's almost comical how fast he's clearing out that lane, but what we're seeing here is really demanded by Baylor's basic plan of attack. If we think of the coverage as being a kind of shell protecting the defense by putting a hard cap over the top, then the main function of Baylor's wide receivers was to pry that shell back, pulling anyone responsible for them outside and deep, uncovering the core of the defense and exposing it to Baylor's run game. The thing that really let them do this, and the thing that's ultimately pulling that linebacker out toward the sideline, is Baylor's package of deep choice concepts, as well as some quick game stuff that they built in to complement it. On a deep choice concept, one receiver is going to be designated to run the choice route, meaning that they'll have multiple options available to him, and he'll decide which route to run only after reading the defensive back that's playing over him. Typically, after the snap, the choice receiver will push vertical as fast as he can for 10 yards. At that point, if he can reach out and touch his defensive back, then he'll continue vertical and try to beat him over the top. This is the part of the concept that pulls the defense's coverage deep, because on any of these deep choice plays, the wide receiver will automatically convert to a vertical route if his defensive back isn't respecting it. If, on the other hand, the wide receiver gets to 10 yards and he cannot reach out and touch his defender, then he's just going to stop, and that's what we're going to see on this play. Here, after the snap, we see this outside wide receiver pushing vertical as fast as he can for 10 yards. As he approaches the 10-yard point, we see his cornerback bailing. The wide receiver definitely can't reach out and touch him, and so he's just going to break his route off and come back down the stem, presenting his quarterback with a nice, easy target and catching the ball in a cushion with room to run underneath that soft defensive back. It's that underneath option then that really pulls the defense's coverage outside toward the sideline, because if the cornerback's going to play off to respect the vertical routes, then this nickelback right here would have to widen hard to take away the stop route. In this way, one receiver is able both to push one defender deep and to pull another one to the sideline, taking them both completely out of the core of the formation and preventing either of them from getting anywhere close to Baylor's run game. On the first play that we studied with those wide splits, we saw Baylor exploiting a light box with a quarterback draw, but the run game really had so much success over the years because they had a good variety of ways to attack that defensive center. In addition to the quarterback run element, they did a really nice job of using an H-back style tight end in the backfield as a sixth blocker, and then built effective play-action fakes off of his blocking responsibilities. On this play, for example, they're using this tight end to run a two-back power play. After the snap, he's going to block back on this defensive end, sealing him off into the inside. They're then going to pull the left guard around the edge that this block creates, where he's going to kick out this linebacker who's scraping to set a hard edge and prevent the ball from getting outside into that no-man's land area that we know Baylor likes to attack. The running back's then able to cut inside of this block, picking up the first down with an efficient, if not flashy, run up the middle. Of course, this Baylor offense wasn't content to settle for efficient very long. On this play, we're going to see the same kind of backfield action with the H-back in a similar up alignment to the right of the quarterback, and the left guard ultimately pulling toward him. So far, this is all going to look just like the power play that we just saw. In fact, if we run the play forward a little bit and pause it right here, it's still hard to tell this from the previous play, especially with that tight end looking like he's coming down inside to block back on a linebacker or a defensive lineman. When we restart the film, though, we see that that guy's actually releasing downfield for a pop pass, running right past Oklahoma State's linebackers as they aggressively attack the line of scrimmage to defend the run action. The Bears pick up an easy completion and get a key first down from deep within their own territory. So that's the offense that Briles ran in 2015 and 2016, but it wouldn't last long. Before the 2016 season, Baylor's football program was implicated in a university-wide sexual assault scandal that saw the school fire or reassign administrators at several levels of the university. While that included Kendall's father, Art, along with several non-coaching football staff members, Kendall himself wasn't implicated, and Baylor kept him on as the offensive coordinator in 2016 before doing a complete reset of their football program under all new leadership. This ushered in a stretch from 2017 to 2020 where Briles worked for 4 different head coaches in 4 seasons before settling in at Arkansas for a few years, and the end result was an offense that looked significantly different by the time we got to 2022. To understand what changed, we need to talk a little bit about what the Baylor offense gave up when it pursued the strategy that we've just talked about. When an offense splits their receivers out wide, which Baylor didn't do all the time, but they did do it more than everybody else, one downside is that it's hard to use those receivers to attack the middle of the field. For example, let's say that you want to run a play-action fake to suck the linebackers up toward the line of scrimmage and then throw behind them. Well, it'll be hard to use a receiver from those super wide splits as part of that strategy because when they start the play so far from those linebackers, it just takes them longer to get into the space behind them, giving those defenders more time to respond to the play fake and recover into their drops. By the same token, it'd be hard for that slot receiver to work any kind of 2-man combination with any receivers from the other side of the formation because, again, they're just too far apart to manipulate or run off defenders for each other. To a large extent, these practical facts dictate the division of labor that we just talked about for Baylor, where the wide receivers are primarily there to pull defenders outside and vertical, while the players in the box do most of the work down the middle. Now, let's compare that to this play, where the Razorbacks have a tight end lined up inside of the hash in better position to quickly attack the middle of the formation, and a wide receiver down at the bottom of the screen. On this play, they're going to use those 2 players working together to attack the middle of the field against one of Cincinnati's blitzes. On defense, the Bearcats are bringing this linebacker right here, and then they're running a version of cover 1 behind it. This means that they're going to be manned up on all of Arkansas's receivers. They're going to play with 1 deep safety in the middle of the field, and they're going to ask the linebacker that's not blitzing to rob the low hole or the area directly over the ball. Because that inside helps there, the man defenders covering the tight ends to the left and the single wide receiver to the right are playing them with outside leverage. All of their help's in the middle of the field here, and so they want to line up outside of those receiving threats so that they can then force them inside toward their help. To attack this, Briles is going to call something that didn't show up in any of the 3 Baylor games that I broke down, and that's the mesh concept, where those 2 receivers are going to run shallow crosses from opposite sides of the field, rubbing as close to each other as possible in the middle. As we've seen, their defenders are playing them with outside leverage, and so these inside breaking routes will let them run away from those defenders while also creating a natural pick in the middle of the field when they cross with each other. This is also a great concept against this specific coverage because, as we've seen, Cincinnati's blitzing 1 linebacker, leaving them with only 1 help player underneath in the middle of the field. That guy might be able to give inside help against one of these crossing routes, but he can't help on both of them at the same time, and so all that the quarterback has to do is read that linebacker and throw to the crosser that he doesn't take. Now, try to imagine running that same mesh concept with these 2 receivers, and you'll quickly see the kind of thing that Baylor's offense wasn't going to be able to do as effectively. Another way the Briles' passing game had changed or evolved at Arkansas was in his increased use of motion, which we'll see on this play. This is a 2nd and 15, and here Arkansas is going to pick up a first down by throwing a curl to the wide receiver up at the top of the screen. From this pre-snap look, though, it's hard to imagine how this will happen because Alabama's got a safety playing inside and over the top, right in the space that this route's supposed to attack. This is where the motion comes in. So how does this work? First of all, one important thing to understand is that Arkansas has set their passing strength to the right side of the formation, with passing strength referring to the side that either has the most receiving threats, or if they're an equal number to each side, the side that has the most dangerous receiving threats. Here, the Razorbacks are in a 2-by-2 formation, with a tight end and a wide receiver down at the bottom of the screen, and 2 wide receivers up at the top. Those 2 quick receivers are going to be more dangerous than a tight end and a receiver, and so the passing strength will be to the right side of this offensive formation. This matters here because Alabama typically likes to set their nickel back to the passing strength. That way, in this nickel package, they're able to play with 3 of their 5 defensive backs to the most dangerous receiving surface, while just 2 defensive backs play to the less threatening side. What Briles is attacking here, though, is the fact that once that nickelback lines up to the passing strength, in most coverages he won't travel with motion across the formation. To attack this tendency, Arkansas is just going to line up in this 2-by-2 set to get the nickelback lined up to the right-hand side of the offense, and then they're going to motion their slot receiver across the formation, effectively switching the passing strength from right to left. As I've said, when Arkansas motions like this, the nickelback typically won't travel with it, and this effectively lets Briles strand that fifth defensive back on the side away from the passing strength. Of course, Alabama knows that this kind of thing can happen, and so they have an adjustment built into their call to address it. They still want to bring a defensive back down over that slot receiver, and so when he motions across the formation, they're going to roll to a single high coverage, with the short side safety dropping down to play over the new passing strength, while the opposite safety drops back to be the single high help player in the middle of the field. When that safety drops, though, it vacates the space that he'd originally been occupying on the hash, and as we've seen, that's exactly the area that the Razorbacks are going to attack with their curl route. So if motion can be such a valuable tool, then why didn't Briles use it to the same degree at Baylor? This brings us to another staple of the Baylor offense, and that was its tempo. In Briles' 2 years as the play caller in Waco, he averaged about 85 plays per game. At Arkansas, that number dropped to about 70, although it did pick up a little bit to 75 in 2022. At any rate, when we look at this drop in plays per game, motion's going to be one factor that contributes to it. Think about it this way. If your goal is to line up and snap the ball as quickly as possible after the previous play, then if a wide receiver has to line up on one side of the formation and then run all the way across it to get set before you snap the ball, that takes up time and slows you down. That'd be doubly true if that wide receiver were starting out in a wide split before the motion or ending up in one after it, because that'd mean that he had to run farther, taking up even more time. Because of this, motion really was antithetical to the combination of tempo and wide splits that Baylor featured on so many of its plays. Briles' slower tempo at Arkansas helps to explain another weird feature of his offenses there. When you look at the overall stats, it looks like his passing offenses at Arkansas were significantly worse than his passing offenses at Baylor, with their average ranking in passing yardage per game finishing just 67th in the country. When you look at more specific stats, though, it's not obvious where this drop's coming from. When you look at Briles' play calling from year to year, his run-pass ratio didn't significantly change, and his Arkansas offenses were right on par with his Baylor offenses in yards per attempt, and were actually better in completion percentage. Diving into this a little bit more, though, the ultimate culprit is tempo. If Arkansas had run 85 plays per game in each of the last 3 years, and if they'd kept all their other averages the same, then their passing offense would have finished around the top 30 twice and in the top 20 once, which would have been pretty similar to where Briles' Baylor offenses typically ended up. So Briles is giving up some passing yardage so that he can slow the game down, bring his receivers closer to the ball, and use more motion to manipulate defenders and create higher percentage throws for his quarterback. A lot of the real benefit of Arkansas's motion, though, came not in the pass game, but in their quarterback-heavy run game, which was the jewel of the offense in 2022. On this play, for example, we see the Razorbacks in a 3-by-1 set with 3 wide receivers to the left side of the formation, and a nub tight end all alone at the top of the screen. As we now know, against this kind of look, that 3-receiver side will be the passing strength, and so here we see Alabama's nickelback lined up over the number 2 receiver, while a safety plays over the top at number 3. The interesting thing on this play, though, will be the run threat that the Razorbacks are presenting. If we look in the backfield, we see that the running back is offset in the shotgun to the quarterback's left, and in most cases, this means that any run play is going to go to the right because the running back already has to work across to the right side to get the ball from the quarterback. Adding to this right side run threat is that tight end on the right, who's being used here to create an extra gap on the edge. It looks like Alabama's pinching the defensive end over that guy just a bit to the inside, and they're doing this in order to get 2 big-bodied defensive linemen on the interior to take on Arkansas's right guard and right tackle. When that defensive end lines up inside of the tight end like this, though, he allows that tight end to outflank him on the edge, and so the tight will need another defender to line up on the outside, setting the edge and cutting off any runs to the perimeter. Here they're going to get that from this cornerback up at the top of the screen. Here's where the motion comes in. Briles is going to get rid of that cornerback and put more pressure on that edge by motioning the number 3 receiver from the opposite side of the formation. When that guy crosses the formation like this, he presents a threat to the cornerback in the passing game, and so that corner has to be ready to widen with him in coverage, as we're going to see right here just before the snap. This means, of course, that the Tide can't count on having that cornerback on the outside to set the edge against the run, and so they need to make a coverage adjustment to account for this motion, again by spinning their safeties down to the motion side. In this way, the cornerback's able to pick up that receiver who's coming across the field in motion, while the safety replaces him outside of the tight end in the perimeter run game. Meanwhile, when that safety rolls down into underneath coverage like this, the opposite safety is going to drop back to play as a single high help player in the deep middle of the field. Now that we understand the motion and Alabama's coverage response to it, we're ready to look at the actual run blocking scheme. Before the motion, I want you to focus on this safety right here. From this alignment, if Arkansas goes with some kind of run to the right like we'd expect, then that safety would be in good position to fill in against a cutback, adding in as an extra defender in the run fit. When Arkansas sends a receiver in motion, though, and when Alabama rolls their safeties toward that motion, it gets rid of that guy, triggering him to drop back as the single high help player, and as a result, Alabama loses him as a cutback defender against the run. This then leaves them with just 3 defenders to go up against Arkansas's left guard and left tackle to the left of center, and Arkansas has a great plan in place to attack those defenders. To do this, they're going to run something called a midline read targeting this interior defensive lineman. This means that the center is going to ignore that guy completely and work up to block this linebacker who's stacked directly over him. Here, he'll just block that guy wherever he happens to go, so those 2 players basically cancel each other out. The left guard and left tackle will then fire out to block the defensive end and outside linebacker that are lined up outside of them. This leaves that interior defensive lineman unblocked in the middle of the formation, and on this play, that's the guy that the quarterback's going to read. As we run this forward, we see that as the quarterback and running back are at the mesh point, that defender's starting to turn his hips and shoulders down inside to chase the running back. When the quarterback sees this, he's going to pull the ball and keep it, running right through that lane that the defender's vacating. With no safety there to fill fast to this side, the quarterback's able to turn into a ball carrier, reading the blocks in front of him and finding a nice lane for an 11-yard gain on 1st and 10. What really struck me about Arkansas's rushing attack, though, was the variety in its reads and backfield actions. So here we see them lining up in another one of those 3-by-1 formations with 3 wide receivers to the left and a lone nub tight end to the right. Again, they're going to motion their number 3 receiver across the formation, but this time Alabama's not going to give them the same adjustment that we saw last time. On the last play, we saw Briles being able to get rid of this backside safety because when he motioned a receiver across the formation, Alabama rolled toward that motion, taking that guy out of the immediate run fit to that side. Well, here, they're not going to do that. Instead, when the wide receiver goes in motion, his defender's just going to follow him, and everybody else is going to stay put, including that safety, leaving him in position to be an additional defender against any potential cutback to this side. Arkansas's fine with this, though, because they're using an entirely different backfield action and read. So remember, on the last play, we said that when the running back was offset to the quarterback's left like this, the most likely play would be a run to the right. And on the last play, we saw just that, with the running back and offensive line executing a zone run to the right, while the quarterback had the option to keep it and attack the backside with a midline read. Well, here, Arkansas's breaking that tendency by running something called a zone bash play. The word bash in that label stands for back away, and what it basically means is that the quarterback and the running back are going to swap responsibilities. So on this kind of play, the quarterback is the guy working as the primary ball carrier behind the offensive line, and here they're going to execute a zone run to the left. He then has the option to hand it off to the running back, and so that guy becomes the guy who can attack the backside edge if the read dictates it, and on this play, this backfield misdirection is going to lead to another nice gain for the quarterback. So how does this develop? Well, as we know, the quarterback and the offensive line are all executing a zone run to the left. Here, Alabama's playing with a nose tackle heads up over the center, and so those guys are going to cancel each other out, leaving the Razorbacks with a left tackle and left guard, apparently outnumbered against Alabama's defensive end, linebacker, and then that safety that their motion wasn't able to get rid of. As the play develops, though, keep an eye on that linebacker because that guy is reading the backfield action between the quarterback and the running back. He knows the same thing that we do, which is that when the quarterback and running back run this kind of mesh action, the most likely outcome is that the offensive line is blocking some kind of run to the right. Because of this, we're going to see him get fooled by the backfield action here, falling back with the running back and taking himself away from the real point of attack, which is the quarterback working a zone run to the left. These missteps leave Alabama with just a defensive end and a safety to the play side, and Arkansas has their left tackle and left guard as 2 blockers in position to take them out, opening up a nice lane for the quarterback to pick up another solid gain. Again, though, this backfield diversity is built around Arkansas's ability to compress splits and manipulate the defense with motion. As we now know, this ties in with what they were doing in the passing game to create a very different and somewhat mutually exclusive plan of attack from the one that we saw at Baylor. If Briles were still at Arkansas, then there wouldn't be much more to say. He ran one thing early in his career, and his offense has picked up new elements along the way. For me, though, there's still one nagging question, which is if this is Briles' new offense, then why did Sonny Dykes, of all people, hire him? Dykes, of course, was a longtime Mike Leach assistant, and he's hired coordinators almost exclusively from the air raid coaching tree. His passing offense has usually finished in the top 15, if not higher, and his run games range from just kinda good, like we saw last year with Garrett Riley, to largely irrelevant. Hiring the guy who ran the Arkansas offense that we just studied then seems pretty off-brand, and this gets into the question of where Briles' new offense came from and why he decided to run it at Arkansas. To get into this, we need to look back at who Briles was working for from 2017 to 2020. During that span, Briles called plays for 4 different head coaches in 4 consecutive seasons, and at first those guys might not seem to have much in common. When we look a little more closely at Briles' stops before Arkansas, though, we see that Kiffin, Applewhite, and Taggart make up a group that is, in some ways, surprisingly cohesive, and working for them had the potential to reinforce some things that Briles had already been doing while discouraging others. First up was Lane Kiffin at Florida Atlantic in 2017. For much of his early career, people wouldn't have connected Kiffin to the kind of quarterback-centric run game that we saw at Arkansas, but when he and Briles got to Boca Raton, he'd just come off of a season with Jalen Hurts at Alabama, where he was already running some of the stuff that we've covered in this video. For example, here we see the Tide playing with 3 receivers to the left and a nub tight end to the right, and just like we've seen from Arkansas, they're using this formation to run a bash play with the quarterback and offensive line working to the left, while the running back attacks the backside edge. What's more, the run play that the quarterback and offensive line are executing is a midline read, and earlier in this video, we saw Arkansas running the same thing out of the same formation, just with different motion and backfield action. Now, I haven't been able to find all of these elements in the Florida Atlantic games that I've studied, and so even though Kiffin had run this kind of stuff before, I don't have clear evidence that he's the one that gave it to Briles. It is, though, absolutely fair to say that the FAU offense was built on a Baylor base with a very definite Kiffin layer added on top. While Kiffin gave up play-calling duties to Briles, he never intended to be totally hands-off with the offense, as he told the South Florida Sun-Sentinel during spring camp. We'll try to make a hybrid and hopefully give defenses problems by doing that. I think that you can give defenses a lot of problems if you take things from different offenses. If they try to figure out how to stop one, then all of a sudden you're running plays from both. It's very difficult. When you read interviews from this time period, you get the strong sense that asking Lane Kiffin to let someone else run his offense is kind of like asking a 3-year-old to sit still. He might try it for a little while, but eventually, well, he just can't help himself. I mean, look at this sideline shot from FAU's conference championship game and tell me that that guy's not heavily involved in the offense. In fact, even in the limited Florida Atlantic tape that I've been able to get, there were whole packages and sequences of play calls that were taken almost play for play from the 2016 Alabama offense. So there was a lot of Kiffin stuff that they were running, and by the end of the year, it might have made up an even more significant chunk of the offense. That said, the offense that we saw from Arkansas in 2022 wasn't really a direct continuation of that hybrid offense, and additional evidence for this comes from Briles' next stop in 2018, where he called plays for Major Applewhite at Houston. That year was a bit of a reset for Briles, with the offense that he ran being much closer to a pure Baylor system, and it's probably not a coincidence that that Houston offense had by far the best passing game and the best balance that Briles has produced since leaving Baylor. When all was said and done, the 2018 Houston offense finished 16th in the country in passing offense and 24th in rushing, giving them the 7th best total offense in the country. Then, in 2019, Briles broke back into the Power 5 when he took a job as the offensive coordinator for Willie Taggart at Florida State, and as far as I can tell from the games that I've been able to get, this is where we start to see some of the final touches that would eventually make up his Arkansas offense. So what did Taggart bring to the table? Well, he started out as a Harbaugh disciple, coaching in their version of a power-based West Coast offense, first working for family patriarch Jack Harbaugh at Western Kentucky, and then for Jim at Stanford. From there, Taggart moved on to his first head coaching job back at Western Kentucky and then took over at South Florida in 2013. With the Bulls, he tried to install that same Harbaugh system but failed miserably, finishing close to last in the country in total offense in each of his first 2 seasons. In response to that failure, starting in the middle of 2014 and then continuing throughout the offseason, he developed what he called the Gulf Coast offense, which aimed to keep the power running style that he'd come up in under the Harbaughs while simplifying the playbook, spreading the field, and going no huddle. To do this, he visited several of the best spread programs of the day, including the Gus Malzahn-inspired offense that had been brought to Clemson by Chad Morris, the Ole Miss offense run by Hugh Freeze and Matt Luke, and yes, the Baylor offense that Kendal Briles had just taken over. When you look at Taggart's South Florida offenses, and then at the offense that he and Briles ran at Florida State, you see a lot of the diversity in backfield actions, motions, and blocking schemes that I highlighted in the Arkansas breakdown earlier in this video, with a specialty in combining motion with quarterback gap schemes like power and counter, often using the quarterback as the primary ball carrier, and then giving him one or two big pulling linemen out in front of him to lead the way through the hole. On this play, for example, we'll see a quarterback power read. So the quarterback and offensive line are executing a power run to the left, and the right guard's going to be the puller here, working toward the play side and leading the quarterback up through the hole if his read should tell him to keep it. Now, this kind of quarterback power scheme wouldn't have been foreign to the Baylor offense or to Kiffin's Alabama offense, but what I haven't seen from those units is the use of wide receiver motion that we're going to see here. On this play, in addition to the basic quarterback power element, there's also going to be a read option component. But instead of that coming from this running back in the backfield like it often would in other offenses, it's going to come from this slot receiver who's going to go in jet motion before the snap. When that wide receiver becomes the second option on this play, it frees up the running back to become an extra blocker on the edge. So here he's going to lead that wide receiver off tackle, blocking a pursuing linebacker and creating a seam for his teammate to get downfield. Although Briles would go on to run similar stuff like this as kind of an infrequent changeup at Arkansas, where the 2019 Florida State offense really anticipated his Razorback unit was in its increased use of the passing game to attack the middle of the formation and create high percentage throws. For example, earlier we saw Arkansas running a mesh play with two players running over the middle and crossing as close to each other as possible. Taggart and Briles also ran this at Florida State, and if we go back even further, we can find it being run by Taggart as part of the simplified, almost generic spread passing game that he employed at South Florida. On this play, we'll see how Briles and Taggart used a different passing concept to attack Virginia, who's bringing pressure by blitzing these two linebackers from the middle of the formation, and then dropping this outside linebacker on the edge out into coverage. The Seminole passing concept then is well set up to attack that player. To do this, they're going to run a concept called drive. In drive, the tight end lined up on the edge to the left side of the formation is going to run a dig route at 10 to 12 yards over the middle. The receiver outside of him will then come underneath of him on a shallow cross, and together these two routes create a high-low read on that dropping linebacker. If we watch that defender after the snap, we see that as the tight end starts to push vertical to run his dig route, he's going to drop with it. This will then allow the slot receiver to come underneath of him on the shallow cross for an easy completion right in front of the quarterback's face to create a 3rd and short. Here we'll see something similar from the Arkansas offense in 2022. Like Virginia on the previous play, the tight are blitzing and bringing this linebacker on a pressure, creating space in the middle of the formation. To attack this, just like on the last play, we're going to see the inside receiver push vertical to run a dig over the middle. And then the slot receiver outside of him is going to come underneath of that route on a shallow cross, creating an easy completion directly over the ball, although on a 3rd and 10 like this, you'd obviously prefer to see something thrown a little bit deeper. Throughout this video then, we've seen where all of the pieces of Kendal Briles' Arkansas offense came from. To close things out, we just need to ask why that was the version of his offense that he chose to run in Fayetteville. One interpretation is that after running mostly the old Baylor stuff at Houston, scoring 44 points per game, using blistering tempo, and finishing with the number 7 offense in the country, he suddenly had a road to Damascus moment while working for Willie Taggart, ultimately deciding that what he really wanted to do was run the ball effectively, slow the game down, and control the clock with a high-efficiency passing game. In this case, Sonny Dykes' decision to hire him might be a little bit surprising, given his air raid roots in history, although it wouldn't necessarily be totally out of step with the offense that Garrett Riley just ran at TCU. Alternatively, maybe the Arkansas offense wasn't really what Briles wanted to run, but he felt that he had to do so, either because of his personnel or his ability to develop it, or because of philosophical differences with his superiors. In this scenario, what he might have really wanted to do was run 85 plays a game, chuck the ball downfield, and use a power run game to punish light boxes like he did at Baylor and Houston. In this scenario, we'd have to understand Briles' move to TCU then as a search for a head coach and program that would allow him to do this. Whichever of these interpretations you prefer, we'll know a lot more soon enough, and this will be one of the big storylines to keep an eye on as the Horned Frogs gear up for spring ball.